Hey folks, thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Craig Nakashian and I am the Director of the Academic Honors Program here at A&M Texarkana. This is a presentation as part of our Honors Colloquium series, which brings together scholars and students to address research or areas of interest. And tonight we are very happy to be joined by essentially a roundtable discussing substance abuse in the ArkLaTex. I'm going to turn it over to a colleague of mine, Dr. Angela Harless, who's Assistant Professor of Counseling. She will introduce the topic and perhaps some of the presenters. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Tonight we have some guests with us that are licensed counselors. We have Billy Eldridge, we have Randy Thomason, and Jeff Sikes, all three who went through our counseling program and are doing great after. Is that right, Randy? You did finish with us, right? You graduated?
I did, yes.
Okay, I thought so. All right, so I'm going to let them tell a little bit about themselves, and then I'll kind of go through a few questions, and after that, we'll let everybody else ask their questions. All right, so who wants to go first? Billy Jeff,
volunteered.
Randy?
Yeah, Billy volunteered to go first.
Yeah, I'll go first. My name's Billy Eldridge. I'm a private practice therapist here in Texarkana. I graduated from the university in 2013. And I've been in private practice now for over 5 years with my business partner, Randy Thomason, who's here. I also contract with an agency out of Oklahoma. And so we have 2 offices here in Texarkana. We have 1 office out in Idabel that we do contract work with. So I'm all over the place all the time. I also am an adjunct faculty member out at the university and have the honor to come back and teach and give back to the program that helped me so much. And let's see, I am a husband, a father of 3, and also I have the podcast. So there's that too.
The beta male revolution.
Yes, about healthier forms of masculinity in the world. So check that out if you want to know more about me. A little shameless self-promotion.
Maybe you can type it into the chat so people can find it.
Okay, I will do.
Idea.
I will do.
Yeah. How about you, Randy? Are you ready to go up next?
Yeah, sure. I'll go up next. Let's see. My name is Randy Thomason. Like Billy said, I'm co-owner of Olive Tree Counseling, which and you might have said this and I skipped it, but we started this in probably 2015, I guess, something like that. And it's growing and changing, and I think we both had the idea of we wanted to help as many people as we possibly could, and we felt we weren't doing that to our maximum ability in our previous endeavors, and so we joined forces and kicking butt. Let's see, I've been a counselor since 1999. I spent about 15 years or so as a substance abuse counselor specifically, and then I guess, let's see, I graduated probably in 2016 from A&M, and so working with a more diverse population now. But it's interesting how I had told myself that I wanted to get out of the substance abuse field and stop working with substance abuse clients, but I still encounter that every day, several times a day. And one thing I wasn't really considering is the many forms that addiction can take. It may not just be substance abuse, but it could be sex or gambling or, especially these days and age, internet. So anyway, that's enough about me for now.
Okay, good point. Thank you, Randy. Jeff, tell us about yourself.
All right, I'm Jeff Sikes. I'm a recent graduate of Texas A&M in 2019. Obviously, I'm not some young whippersnapper. I'm working on a second career. I'd spent the previous almost 30 years working as an attorney and a lobbyist, mainly. I ran a legislative shop in Little Rock. Got into this kind of through the back door because I wound up in treatment myself, and witnessed people going through the process and what evidence-based practice actually looks like as applied to folks with substance use addictions, and just really got interested in it. I wanted to do something different. I'd already retired, taken an early retirement, so this path was kind of open to me. I've wound up now. I'm a licensed associate counselor in Arkansas, and so I'm under supervision, trying to get my hours in there, and I'm contracting with a company out of Arkadelphia, providing school-based mental health, working mainly with children, which is odd because I never had any children of my own. But and I fully intended to work almost totally in the substance abuse field, and have wound up just falling in love with these kids and really enjoying that. So I still run into it, like Randy said. I mean, a lot of my parents, even though they may not tell me directly that there's substance use issues, I mean, it's very apparent whenever you're dealing with these people that there are. And so it just kind of flavors everything around you. It's almost like the water you have to swim in if you're a therapist. But yeah, that's kind of how I came to this position, and I'll let you guys take it back.
Okay, so that was going to be my next question, how you got into counseling or what drew you into counseling.
All right, I'll take that one next.
Okay.
And this will probably make Billy super duper happy. He likes it when I provide a little self-disclosure when we're doing presentations and things like that. And I'm always pretty resistant to doing that, but I'll share a little bit about myself. So I was 21 and I was kind of a raging young adult alcoholic, and I got in some trouble and I went to rehab, and I didn't listen to anyone. Like, I thought I knew everything and I shut everyone out. And then for some reason, the only person that I would listen to was this substance abuse counselor, one of them. Like, there were probably 4 or 5 of them, but I only listened to one of them. And as the time rolled on that I was there and I became more and more open to the process, eventually, somewhere along the way, I thought, man, if that guy could help me, I mean, I could probably help somebody else. And I knew how miserable I was before I went in there. And I was like, man, if I could save someone from that misery, that would just, I mean, that would bless my life. You know, I really thought that was what I needed to be doing. And so I just kind of went from there. And then, so I started taking classes over at Texarkana College in their drug and alcohol counselors program. And a lot of my motivation was just to learn more about my personal alcoholism, while also, you know, taking these counseling courses and then hopefully one day be a counselor. And so, you know, the more I learned about it, the more interested I was in. And it's really interesting. And some of you may laugh at this. When I was little, when I was growing up, I wanted to be 2 things. I wanted to be an archaeologist like Indiana Jones, or I wanted to be Sigmund Freud. And I don't know why I wanted to be Sigmund Freud. I think it's because I saw him in Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, one of those movies, if you can remember back that far. But I just knew that I wanted to either be an archaeologist or I wanted to be G.I. Joe, which I spent some time in the military and kind of did that thing. And so then it kind of, you know, once I realized that being an archaeologist would be super boring, and I had no desire to do that once I realized how, you know, it's not like swinging from vines. And so in school, I was like, yeah, okay. I feel like all my life I've really wanted to be a counselor. And I started thinking about how at times in the past, like if somebody was struggling with something, they'd come talk to me, and I'd listen. And I was probably given a lot of advice back then, which we don't do as therapists, but you know, I felt like, oh, this is what this is. This is all about giving advice and, you know, helping people that way. And so I think that I gained more insight into myself, and I really started to develop a passion for helping people through those processes, while also learning more and more about my own struggles, my own addiction. So that's what started me off. And that was in '98.
Yeah. Okay.
All right, Billy. Or Jeff.
Well,
Thank you,
Well,
Jeff,
Randy.
a little bit. Go ahead.
one thing Randy forgot to mention, at one point, he was the clinical director of Hazel Street Recovery, which was featured on the Dr. Phil show. So he's being a little coy over there.
Oh,
Dr. Phil came in and filmed an episode at the treatment center. He was the clinical director of it at one point. So I don't know if he should be ashamed or proud of that. So I got into counseling in the same way. I love counselor stories. Like, how did you get into counseling? Because it's usually based around some form of dysfunction. A life thing that happened, and you think, well, that might be a neat career to get into. Unlike these two guys who sought help in treatment prior to becoming a therapist, I didn't quite do that. My thought pattern was in the first half of life, I was in construction, and I was in these fields I never fit into. And I always felt like an awkward kid, never felt like I fit in. There was really no data or anything to support this. I had plenty of friends. I just felt profoundly insecure, and didn't know quite how to deal with that. And so I just kind of went as life pushed me, and like I felt that would make the people around me proud. And I thought a career in construction and that would be a manly type of career to be in. But needless to say, it was like a square peg in a round hole. And I was miserable for a lot of years doing that. And I got into a lot of dysfunctional ways of coping and handling that. I was successful and built a good career there, but none of that mattered. It was not the job for me. It just didn't fit my personality. So I began to self-medicate along the line there somewhere. And I had a back injury, and they had prescribed me prescription opiates, things along the line of hydrocodone and Oxycontin. And I began to find out very quickly that when I took those medicines, there was a secondary thing that happened, that suddenly I felt confident, and I could talk to people with ease, and then I didn't struggle with my insecurities and my low self-esteem. And I thought I'd found the answer to all my problems. And in there, eventually, the solution began to manifest in different problems in my life. Dysfunction in my relationships. I went through a divorce, which I thought I would never do. I was one of these guys, like, once you get married, you just stay married, and that's what you do. But the relationship didn't work out. The career collapsed. I found myself for the first time in my life without a plan. And I tried a few different things, and I knew at that time I began to realize I had an issue. I had a problem. And I figured the way you get help is you go to therapy. So I was smart and intelligent. I don't need therapy. I'll just become a therapist and I'll fix myself, was probably my thought pattern. Just a word to the wise, you cannot do that. So I went and enrolled myself into grad school, and I was just going to figure out how to fix all my problems. And I would just learn through academics and study what the root of all my issues were. Apparently, I have a real hard time seeing my own stuff. I can identify what's going on in other people's life, but am completely in denial and oblivious to what I need to work on. And so I made it through about a couple of semesters of grad school, and just couldn't hang on anymore. And through a series of events, found myself in a 90-day treatment center, went through treatment, came out, and life began to change. It got a little better, yet still all knowing and all, they warned me of things, cross addiction. Even though I'd gone in for primarily opiates, I was told not to use anything that changed the way I feel. Yet I knew better than them, and still dabbled with alcohol and benzos, which would be like Xanax and Valium. I thought I'd always had problems with anxiety. I can treat myself with those medications. It'll be okay. It wasn't my primary drug of choice. As long as I stay away from opiates, it will be okay. Yet they were right again. I cross-addicted, and whenever I cross-addict to something and my life collapses on me, it just leads me back to my primary drug of choice, which was opiates. Somewhere along the line, I ran into Randy and a few other professors that could kind of see the writing on the wall, called me out on my behavior. Randy, being in recovery, kind of told me to quit playing games with my life and my career, and when was I going to get serious. And because of his previous history, he was able to lend a helping hand. And somewhere along there, I just surrendered and admitted that I didn't know everything and I needed to quit thinking for myself, and I just needed some help. So for about 2 to 3 years there, I just followed Randy around and did what he told me to do, because he had had previous success with a problem I was dealing with. So it just makes sense that you would go to someone who had had a little bit of success with the problem and listen to them for a change. And so I've been sober now since May 20th of 2013. And just because of that, I have a natural desire to help other people struggling with addiction. It's by no means everything I do. It may be about 25% of what I do, but just because I'm kind of open with my story and the struggles and the things I've dealt with, you know, I get referred people who are struggling. And I think there is something about identification, because, you know, there's a lot of shame and a lot of stigma around addiction. And a lot of people want to hide it. And that was my biggest problem. I wanted to fix it and sweep it under the rug and never talk about it again. Well, that's not really the way this thing works. It's a one day at a time thing. It's a bit of a life sentence, but I wouldn't change any bit of it at this point. My life, if I would have written down everything I wanted out of a life in recovery when I started, I would have really sold myself short, because all I wanted to do was get sober. But through that life and through that inward work, through therapy and other programs that I work, 12-step programs, I was able to do the things I always wanted to do with drugs and alcohol. And that was to find confidence, find authenticity, find out who I really am. And I realized, you know, I'm a more sensitive type guy. I have a podcast called Beta Male Revolution. And it really is in the vein of guys like Fred Rogers and Carl Rogers and these softer men in the world and the way they approach life. And yet they're confident and they're effective, and they don't have to be the other. So it really gave me permission just to be me. And that's what I've been looking to be my whole life. So that's the long answer to how I got into therapy.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you all sharing. And I appreciate you, Billy, bringing up the fact that, well, all of you did, that substance abuse affects everybody's lives at some point or another, whether you're the abuser or you're a family member or a friend or a coworker. It touches everybody's lives at some point. And part of the problem that perpetuates it is the secrecy, and people don't want to admit it or hide it from other people that this is going on in their family. So they do things to take care of whatever comes up from it, to slide it under the rug so nobody notices. And, you know, I think that's one of the big factors that contributes to it. What do you think?
Most definitely. I feel like, you know, addiction in a way is designed to keep people from seeing that it's there. And it doesn't matter if it's the addict who's doing the hiding or not, you know, and the addict a lot of times is not doing that to be intentionally deceitful. You know, they're doing it out of shame and guilt.
Right.
Whereas family members, a lot of times, they may be doing it, especially like if we're talking about a parental relationship, the parent may be feeling guilty. They're like, oh my gosh, how can I be raising a child who's an addict? You know, so they're making it about themselves. And so they don't know how to talk about that. But I think that it boils down to they, on some level, feel like other people will not understand and other families are not going through this problem. But you're exactly right, Angela. And, you know, in classes I've taught out there at A&M, I'll have the students raise their hand about who in this room either has been affected directly or knows someone who has, and everyone raises their hand. Mm-hmm. You know, we could poll people at Walmart or the mall or the movies, wherever we're at, we could poll people. And if they're being honest, then they would say, yes, I know a family member, or I am, or, you know, we all know someone who's been affected by addiction. but it still creates and even though we may know that, it creates such a feeling of isolation and insecurities about, people are not going to understand this, or they're going to blame someone. And so it creates that feeling that no one understands.
Right, right. And so it makes it harder, I would think, for someone who's coming out of rehabilitation to go back to that home again, where everybody had to do their part for equalization in the home to keep things running smoothly. They want to keep doing their role. And
Right.
those that know anything about substance abuse knows that everybody has a role to make everything smooth. But then, the person that comes back and wants to change their life, it kind of makes it hard on them to change their life.
Definitely. It's like, and the concept is, homeostasis. A family system is going to want to return to a previous level of functioning. And so you take someone who's coming out of treatment, and if that family has not done things to start to change themselves, then we're inserting that person from rehab back into the family system. And more often than not, and we really see this with children and teenagers and young people who come back to their parents' house, the family system takes over, because a system is going to have more power than an individual. We see that a lot. And so the system will gradually pull that person back into addictive behaviors. Does anybody else have anything to say?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's an interesting point. And what I've noticed is with treatment, so many of these treatment facilities are way off. So the person goes off to treatment, the kid goes off to treatment, and then they come back, and there's no real work with the family. There might be a phone call or two, but if you go to treatment, like say I did in Fort Lauderdale, Miami, and you're from Little Rock, I mean, you're just not going to run into your spouse down there, and you might have a phone call or two, and so there's no way they can do anything about that. I mean, the treatment facility is where it is. But I noticed that right off the bat. You come right back to the same pool that you were trying to escape from, with people who don't quite understand the dynamics. I mean, they're still mad at you from before you went, or they're even more mad because you stayed longer than they thought you would. And so they just don't provide very much basic support.
Yeah, I agree with that.
So do you see that family treatment is coming into play nowadays? So let's talk about treatment and whether, they're starting to do more with families. I read a little bit about it.
I'll jump in on that one. Yes, it really depends on the treatment center, like Jeff was saying, and your access to treatment. I mean, if you've got private insurance or money, you can get all the kind of treatment you want to get. But if you have challenges in the area of socioeconomics, and your options are limited, that really determines how and where you're going to get treatment. At the treatment facility I went to, they had family programs, they had family days. I was out of my house, but I have my mother struggles with codependency. She's in recovery from that. She talks about that, so I'm not telling her business. And that was part of our story as a family system. I had a very codependent mother. People get they want to know what that term means. What is codependency? The dependency is I need you. Codependency is I need you to need me. So it creates a system by which even in my dysfunction, in my addiction, my mother got some level of worthiness off of rescuing me and preventing the consequences of my addiction from happening when I was younger. So I moved out of the house, and my middle brother is not an addict, but my youngest brother also struggles with addiction. And he was 13 years younger than me. So I'm out of the house, I'm in recovery, and I'm seeing the same pattern repeat with my mother and my younger brother in the enabling, and the system that perpetuates the addiction. They asked me if I believe in incarcerating addicts. I believe we should rehabilitate addicts. I don't believe we should incarcerate addicts. But if we could lock up the enablers for about 2 months, that would be great. And
Yeah.
while we get the addict well, the system may be more successful. But so when I saw my mom falling into this trap, I reached out to the Betty Ford Hazelden Center, which has a family program up there, and was able to send my mom to treatment for codependency. And she went to like a 4-day retreat where they put you kind of like treatment, even though you're not an addict. But then we go back to, you have to have the resources to be able to make that happen. We are trying to build more things within our community. I'm on the board and work with Haven Homes, which is a 12-month recovery program for men without resources, and we raise funds. They also provide halfway houses for women, and we have things like this popping up all over the place. But the one integral part is you have to bring in the whole family. A lot of these in our guys programs, these are dads who've, due to the nature of their addiction, have bailed on their responsibilities as fathers. And when they're getting sober, they're wanting to rebuild those relationships, but there's a lot of resentments and hurts. And just to think you're going to skip back home and everything's going to be okay now that daddy's sober is just not the case. There is a lot of dysfunction within the system, and it's hard to get the family to want to do anything about it sometimes because there's such a big issue with the identified patient, the drug addict or the alcoholic. It's like, I don't have a problem. They have a problem. They need to go get fixed. Why do I need to work on me? They're the one causing chaos in the family. Well, that's so true, but they don't realize how the system perpetuated it. And if a system doesn't allow for addiction, the addict will either leave the system and go look for a new system, or it'll begin to die. Where did you get the money for it? How did you get your cell phone paid for? When we're thinking about teens, I ask parents all the time. I can't get them to quit doing drugs. Well, who's paying for their cell phone? Who pays for their gas? Where do they get their transportation to go get the drugs? How do they, what we do have control over, let's pull away access to those things that are providing the system by which they can do the drugs. And, the addict feels that's very unfair, but so they would. I felt things were very unfair when people were trying to get me well.
And, I think family members, they have to reach bottom themselves because, and I know I'll do this too, like we'll present a really clear plan of if you want to stop the addiction, you will do A, B, and C. And even family members, if they're not quite ready for that thing to change, they'll refuse, or they'll say they will, but they never do follow through with, whatever A, B, and C is. And, going back to this real quick, I wouldn't say that there's an increased focus on family treatment. I think that idea has been around since probably the mid to late 70s, but our access, and Jeff and Billy both mentioned this, when I was at Hazel Street, we're located in Texarkana, Texas, but we were taking kids as far away as Canada, or California. Like we're getting kids from all across the country. And so most of their families could come in, and you mentioned Dr. Phil earlier, we would get kids from the Dr. Phil show where a lot of them were coming from California. And so then the Dr. Phil show would have to fit the bill most of the time because the family couldn't afford the treatment. They would fit the bill for them to come in for one weekend out of, 90 days or 6 months, however long the kid was there. So, the family would have to they would have to be transport themselves to the Texarkana. And, some families aren't willing to do that. I think that one thing that's going to help with family treatment is our reliance on Zoom and Google Duo, these platforms that allow us to do virtual counseling. I think that it's shown a lot of therapists that we can be, I don't know if I'd say just as effective as we can if you're sitting in the room with me, but we can still be highly effective even through these online platforms.
That's a good.
Would you guys agree with that?
I completely agree with that.
Absolutely.
So it's like it will increase access to family treatment. Sorry.
So what are the treatment options, or would you like to talk about the trends first and then the treatment options? What are the trends right now as far as substance abuse goes?
Well, I spoke like just in our local community. I spoke with Scott Megason, who works on one of our drug task force today, and just a couple days ago, they had a situation where a 2-year-old overdosed on some Percocet that the parents had illegally obtained and left some out, and they had to give naloxone to the 2-year-old, which is an antagonist that stops the overdose, and it saved the 2-year-old's life. But let's see, in Arkansas with naloxone, they've saved over 876 people in this past year. In Arkansas is the number 2 prescriber of opioids in the nation, just right,
Oh, wow.
right back here. When we're looking
Yeah.
at Bowie County, in Bowie County, there's 115 hydrocodone prescriptions for every 100 people. So if you don't have your prescription, somebody's got yours. And there's more prescriptions than there are people. So when we're looking at, people aren't just getting heroin from Mexico. A lot of this is coming from pill mills and overprescribing and misprescribing facilities. Now, we've cracked down on that here lately due to the spotlight being on opiate addiction. But we're losing about 198 people a day in America to overdose. So you just picture if a plane was crashing every day with 198 people on it, how long do you think it would be before people were picketing American Airlines and losing their absolute mind over the fact that we're losing 198 people a day to an airline death? Yet we're losing 198 people a day to opioid overdose, and it's primarily prescription opioids that they're dying from. And so we have to look at prescribing. So the trends are definitely in my world. When I'm dealing with families, it's usually opiates, not that we don't get alcohol. It really depends on where I am. If I'm in a rural community, methamphetamine is probably going to be the number one. If I'm dealing in a middle class area, it's going to be prescription opioids. So it's another socioeconomic thing.
Right. So what are the treatment options like in our area for people? Or in general, if you want to talk about just in general.
Well, I can go ahead, Brand.
Well, I was going to just talk briefly about like what we call the continuum of care. And I think that that's the way you want to do things, regardless of the approach, regardless of the problem that we're talking about. And that is, first you'll start off with the least structured environment that you can. What is the least amount of therapy that you can provide to this person and get them the help that they need? I personally have a rule of thumb that if someone could not do their addiction, whatever it is, for 1 week, then they probably don't need to go to residential treatment, and they can probably make it just fine in outpatient. Now, it may need to be an intensive outpatient program or some sort of self-help support group combined with individual therapy, family therapy. But starting from the most restrictive is you're going to be looking at something like a detox. So if someone is going to go through any sort of withdrawal, particularly medical withdrawal, then they may need some sort of intensive detox program that can provide medication to help assist them through the detoxification process. And then you kind of step down in structure from detox, where you have your 30 to 45 day programs, which in my opinion, 90 days is really what we need to be looking at as far as successful treatment goes. I think that those programs are going to be more successful than your 30 to 45 day ones.
Yeah.
And personally, I'm
the 30
for 54 days in a 28-day program.
And aren't those based more on reimbursement than anything else? I mean, they're not based on any kind of data out there, I don't think, that's showing that 28 days or 30 days is where you're going to get your maximum effectiveness.
That's right. That is exactly right.
I think we see higher success rates with longer periods of treatment. However that looks on the continuum of care, if somebody goes to a 28-day program, we want to see a step down into an outpatient, which is usually like 3 days a week for 3 hours a night, and then one individual session. So the 3 days a week, 3 hours a night, an outpatient will be in a group setting, and then you'll get 1 hour of one-on-one. So you're doing 10 hours a week of therapy. Some people
right.
stop there. So the options are, we have probably one official registered outpatient in Texarkana. You know, we hope to be starting one at some point. You know, if anybody is in the area of counseling and interested in the field, start an outpatient because we need one. What you can do right now for detox is you can go to Brentwood. There's some places in Dallas. Brentwood's in Shreveport. There's some places in Dallas. There's some places in Little Rock,
Riverview. Here in Texas.
Riverview. Yeah.
Now,
So
Riverview is just hospital, right? Or do they have outpatient again?
Okay, so maybe a month or so ago, I saw their director of outpatient services. So I don't know if they've started it yet, but they
Oh,
are,
okay.
they're looking into starting some outpatient back up.
Oh, good.
yeah.
Good deal.
So when somebody comes in and they're dealing with addiction, one, we've got to look at what level of care do they need.
Mhm.
What are they on? Because that's going to determine, two, how they detox, because you want a safe medical detox for sure. And that's what keeps so many people on it, especially opiates, is that the fear of the physical pain that you go through from withdrawal is excruciating. And so many opiate addicts have gone through it so many times that the thought of doing it again, they'll resist treatment until they find out that you can ease them off. And there was an old school method of thinking they just need to tough it out and feel all of it, but that is counterproductive. That chases people away from treatment. Compassionate, client-centered care is very big in addiction treatment right now. So, you know, if somebody came in and they were suffering from addiction, it's nice if you can find all-inclusive one-stop shop that does detox and then moves you from that facility right over to treatment, and you don't leave the facility, because the problem is so many people get detox and then they think I'm well, yet they haven't dealt with the underlying causes and conditions of the addiction, because the taking of the pills or the substance is just a symptom of the overall malady, the overall dysfunction. What was really going on, and why were you needing to alter your state of consciousness in the first place? You know, what were you dealing with? And we've kind of learning that one of the big gateway drugs is trauma. You know, a large percentage of people who deal with addiction, not everyone, but a large percentage, have some form of childhood trauma. And so that adds another layer to the compassionate care, you know, and we want to stigmatize. And here in the South, I think we look at morality and we look at drug addiction like a moral issue. It's a bad person who needs to become good instead of a sick person who needs to become well. And so, and that's the stigma that underlies it. People want to keep it a secret, but you can't, it isolates an individual. And by its nature, addiction isolates people, and addiction just festers and grows in isolation. It really takes community to heal and just kind of busting the top off of it. And, you know, and that's why, you know, I don't mind talking about the stuff I went through, but in the beginning, I didn't want to. It's the last thing I wanted to do was say anything about it, because there was so much shame surrounded around it. But after you spend a little time in recovery, you're like, oh, no big deal. Yeah. But yeah, I don't know if we answered
there's nothing here in the Texarkana area that would do all those things, is what you're saying.
Not the one-stop shop. We do have River Ridge on the Arkansas side to get it. It's more state funded if you're an Arkansas resident. If you're not an Arkansas resident, you have to pay out of pocket. But if you want detox and to stay in treatment for more than you know, just a small amount of time, you're going to have to go out of town.
Yeah.
And that's the
Which
problem.
ones are the ones you prefer that you would send a client to out of town?
I like Palmetto Addiction and Recovery in Rayville, Louisiana. It's a 90-day inpatient program, and they do detox and they provide the treatment. And I'm just a fan because I'm an alumni.
Yeah.
Right.
The last place in the world I wanted to graduate from.
Right.
You know, I've also worked a lot side by side with Palmetto, and I find them highly estimable too. But we also would use like Summer Sky in Stephenville, Texas. They seem to do a really good job. La Hacienda
The
in
hacienda.
Kerrville, Texas. They do a really good job. And then, you know, for Arkansas folks, maybe Oasis in Little Rock. We've done some work with them. They're just, you know, I mean, those are at least 2 hours away from us, you know, which is
And then,
sad.
yeah, and then you're running into, you got to look at, to get into those places, you're going to have to at least have insurance. And then a lot of times when you're looking at a deductible that has to be met, a lot of times that's $2,500 to $3,000 out of pocket. And when you're talking, if you're having to pay cash for these places, some of them are upwards of $10, $15, $20,000 a month. And it's just insane. So we have to look at broadening our reach to access to treatment to everyone, not just some people. And I think that's the biggest hurdle we've got to overcome right now is, you know, if you're like me and you're struggling, you get to go to rehab. If your story's a little bit different, maybe you have to go before a judge and you get jail time, and that's just not fair.
Yeah.
And that's a real issue there, right? Is that instead of getting help for years, it seems like, well, the majority of people that are in jail or in prison, a lot of it stems from substance abuse, right? And addiction.
Definitely.
And they're having to dry out in jail. And they're going through all those painful symptoms you were saying when you're trying to get off of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's very common. They do dry out in jail. That's one of the first things.
Like
I practiced for years. I did criminal practice for years, and that was a typical way you handled it when you had someone that had a really bad addiction, was you let them dry out a few weeks in jail before they really couldn't hold a cogent or coherent conversation with you about their ultimate fate when they come in strung out. And, you know, the unfortunate thing is, and maybe it's changed some because I just haven't done this like Randy and Billy have, but I know for me in the past, you had several places in the state, but they would be like 30 days, maybe 45 days. And so what really seemed to happen to me was you had people who had the heat on them, typically from the law. And so they're trying to get into these places. They get in, the treatment is, you know, maybe a little iffy as far as it may just be based wholly around, say, Alcoholics Anonymous. May not be as evidence-based as you might like. And they're really there just to get the heat off of them and maybe to help out in court. And they don't do much with the family. And they really just walk out of those places, and it's almost like they walk right back into the same problem that they had. So it just didn't seem like we had anything here that was actually set up to work, if that makes any sense. They seemed like they were set up to fail. The people that were running them were trying their best, but their hands were just tied, strictly through funding issues.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's the way it is now or not, but
But I think to tie in with that too, Jeff, I think that over the past 20 years or so, we've seen a big shift from the hardcore confrontation, you know, let's hammer this recovery into this client, let's bust through their denial. I think we've seen a shift of that kind of thinking to a more motivational approach about let's meet them where they're at and try to bring them forward from there, instead of force feeding them this recovery stuff that they don't necessarily want yet. And so now we're more interested in motivational interviewing and the stages of change and helping someone move forward the way they would want to, not how, you know, I think that when I first started counseling, I think it was a little bit about enforcing especially in the substance abuse treatment field, it was about enforcing our will on people, you know, kind of that. And I think that was a large part of that criminal justice mentality in the substance abuse treatment field in that time. You know, they just kind of tied together like that. So
do you see that they're making any strides in improving what they're doing as far as like drug courts and things like that? I know Sonia Stewart mentioned that they're doing that more often now than they used to. Is that helping, or is it just kind of like a Band-Aid? I know you said they just kind of do this 12-step. Is that what they're doing now in these programs? Or you don't know?
Jump in, anybody?
Well, I'm sorry. I was reading the chat. Yeah, I was reading the
Yeah, I
comments.
was too. I'm
on your-
sorry.
I'm sorry. No, just to speak about drug courts specifically real quick, I like the idea of drug court because I like the idea of, being accountable. And I think that that's a good idea with probation. And I think drug court just kind of takes that to the next level. And I think it shows a shift from let's just lock everybody up to drug court's good about let's give them some chances. We don't want someone to be locked up for 2 years for a marijuana charge. We want to get them rehab if we can, and we want them to change and be productive members of society. So I think that drug court is a big shift in thinking from, let's just lock everybody up to let's get them help first. And, there's not a perfect system. Drug court's not a perfect system. I don't care where we're talking about it. It always has its issues, but I think that it is much better than just the incarcerate, first approach for sure.
Yeah.
And I think drug court also, from my dealings, especially like with here, with Bowie County and Miller County, they seem to have a pretty heavy focus, and somebody can fix this if it's wrong, but they seem to have a heavy focus on involving the whole family and recognizing that the person's system needs to change, whether it's their family system, their peer system. Like, these systems have to be changed. You cannot take the same person and throw them back in the same environment and expect them to change. Some will be resilient enough that they will change, but for the most part, they're going to fade and they're going to fail. So I think that drug court recognizes that the systems need to change around the person also, and they emphasize that.
Good.
I think when
So-
we look, go ahead.
Go
Dr.
ahead.
Lee. Well, I think when we look at it from a community standpoint, and an economic standpoint, we've gotten a chance to talk to a lot of businesses about, interventions and programs we can do beyond just firing a tenured employee. We have nurses programs now. We have physicians programs now. Attorneys have JLAP, that's the Judges and Lawyers Association that work with judges and lawyers. And it doesn't just affect one type of person, but nurses have TPAP and doctors have the PCP. And they're seeing that it benefits to rehabilitate people. And just from a community standpoint, when you look at a drug addict who is a functional member of society in their sobriety, but a drain on the system in their addiction. And I was not too far away from, at one point in my life, I had to file bankruptcy. I was looking at being on social services, needing Medicaid, needing assistance to live, to being someone who pays a fair amount of taxes now. That's a lot more productive for society to have me as a sober human being than someone who's locked up that's costing the county, thousands upon thousands of dollars to have incarcerated, because of the byproduct of the addiction usually leads to illegal activity. And that's the behavior we look at that people see as so reprehensible. It's usually, Sonia had put down here, 87% of people who commit criminal offenses are under the influence of some substance. In my right mind, not under the influence of anything, I don't commit any crimes. Under the influence and desperate.
Usually.
Yeah, usually. Thanks, Rick. Under the influence, or where probably the biggest point would not be under the influence, but withdrawing from a substance that has hardwired itself into my limbic system, that has become important to me as air and water, and it's a survival mechanism. Then I will go to any lengths to procure that substance to eradicate the withdrawal symptom. And so I think having compassion and understanding, and also, sometimes it does take tough systems like drug court, because like I said, when I walked in to the university, I had all the answers. I knew how to fix myself, and no one was going to tell me anything. I was walking around with this dichotomy of an egomaniac with an inferiority complex. I thought I knew everything, yet couldn't stand myself. But it was the system by which people had conversations with me and talked to me in certain ways that helped me to realize my own dysfunction. And I think if we could do more of that with people, and that was a community thing. That wasn't a legal system. That was people who had built relationship with me, who I felt really cared about me, that told me I needed to get my crap together.
Yeah. Well, I can see how that could spill over into, say, CPS, where they're having to take these children from parents who, like you said, will do anything for their habit and have neglected their children. Then their children get taken from them. If they could get rehabilitated and get what they need to get better, then they would be better parents and be able to take care of their kids, and there wouldn't be such a drain on the system there trying to find foster care for all these kids.
Well, absolutely.
Most definitely.
And we talk about the power of the substances. How powerful does something have to be to override a maternal instinct to protect your children? And I point that out all the time. I mean, I believe when a mother tells me they love their children, yet their behavior says everything else because they're putting drugs ahead of them. I mean, how strong does that substance have to be to override the nurturing and protecting thing you have innately in you as a parent? And so we're dealing with powerful substances. And I think we have to acknowledge that, and we have to combat them correctly and not just act like people just need to get their act together and the world would be okay.
Right.
Well,
Very
and I
difficult.
think that, instead of just, we can't just demonize the substance. We have to look at the physiological processes that are going on inside the individual. They've altered their neurochemistry so much that they have to have the drug. And you mentioned this a minute ago, to feel any sense of normalcy. And so without it, then it's just this strong pull physically for that substance, And I think that is one of the main things that, and I don't want to say trumps, but, kind of beats out that parental instinct that people have. I never will forget one of the most heartbreaking cases I ever saw. This lady had been given probably 8 chances by Child Protective Services to straighten up and do right or whatever. And she would make it maybe 30 days or so, and then she would fail. And then so finally they had to move to, and they gave her maybe too many chances. I don't know. But eventually, they moved to terminate her parental rights. And I had to testify in that case. And it was just heartbreaking, for me, and to watch these kids and, how much they love their mother. And it boggled my mind. I think I'd probably only been counseling about a year at that point. So I was still really, really new. And I just couldn't understand how that addiction was just so powerful that even after 8 chances, she wouldn't get it.
Okay, so do you guys want to open it up to questions now? It's about 8 o'clock. Or did you have anything else you wanted to add first?
We could probably talk all night on this. So we
I was going to say,
Yeah.
we could talk about addiction probably all night. But
this is like the tip of the iceberg. It's so nuanced.
Right.
There's so many things we could cover, but for this,
Right.
probably questions would be good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. So we'll, if everybody wants to turn on their video, and Craig can turn on your mic and let you unmute it, we can do that. Or if you just want to send in a question through the chat, we'll do that too.
Yeah, they should be able to unmute if they want to. I think I've
Okay.
set that correctly. We'll find out in a minute.
If you have a class with me and you don't ask a question, I will deduct points.
Oh,
There's
Okay,
shade.
then I will have to ask a
Yeah.
question.
Go ahead.
What is your biggest takeaway for those that have been in programs for substance abuse? What's your biggest takeaway as a patient yourself?
For me, surrender. It really just takes a surrendering to other ideas and listening. I had a lot of opinions and a lot of thoughts and a lot of ideas about how things ought to be and how I ought to be treated. And I just needed to be quiet and listen and let others think for me for a while, because as Randy mentioned, I'd so altered my brain chemistry and messed with the most best part of my brain, my prefrontal cortex, my reasoning system was offline. I couldn't make a reasonable decision to save my life. So to have any ideas or thoughts about how I needed to get well, I just needed to trust the professionals. So I just had to surrender and trust some people for a change. But I think it helped to have a relationship with some of them first. I really credit and I'll toot his horn, Randy, for helping save my life. If it wasn't for him, I don't know if I'd be here today.
We're ride or die, bro.
You know, with me, it was funny because I sobered up the first time in 1999. And at that point, I really had no idea that there were any places that even existed to treat folks. I kind of figured it out after a while because I was kind of like Billy, I was a genius. I would, before I got sober, I would call up a place and just tell them, tell me the secret to doing this. I'm so smart, I can do it myself. Someone will just tell me how to get sober, and none of that worked. And so I wound up, I woke up one morning and I realized that, I had a decision to make. I was going to have to be the best alcoholic I could be and lose every single thing in my life, or I was going to have to change my life. And so I wound up in AA, and I worked that system for a long time, and it worked for me for about 13 years. And then through some life events, I fell off the wagon. And so when I wound up back in treatment, I tried to go back to AA. I just couldn't make it work. I wound up back in treatment down in Fort Lauderdale. And the thing that struck me down there was it was a truly evidence-based program where certainly AA was, support groups. And we went to those, and I still view treatment a lot through those lenses, or through that particular lens. But you had people that were trained, PhD level of folks that were trained in doing this. And it just made so much difference. I mean, I think you can hear it with Billy and Randy. I don't have near the experience that they do in this, but you can just hear how much knowledge they have and talking about family systems and, the physiological aspects of it, how this operates on you. That if you don't get that, I believe, and that's what pushed me into this field. If you don't get something like that, I mean, the odds are you're not going to make it. Now, maybe you do. Maybe you get into AA or NA or something like that and you make it. But I think the odds are stacked against you. I wanted to be able to get into the field to work with folks like Billy and Randy to provide that higher level of care that I think, at least for me, made the difference. And that's, that would be my take on it from the treatment perspective.
I like that answer. I was thinking this too. I think one of my biggest takeaways was probably the sense of community or cooperativeness, fitting in, however you want to word it. I think that, through my personal alcoholism, and I see this in my clients too, it is so severing in relationships. Mm-hmm. And so I think that was one of the first things that I could truly feel when I was in rehab myself, was these connections with these other people that were in there. We identified, our fears were similar, our angers, our hurts, all these things were similar. And, where I'm from, you don't talk about things. And I think that treatment gave me the first opportunity to talk about things that made me scared, to talk about the traumas that I'd experienced and the pains and the pains that I had inflicted on others. It wasn't all about me being hurt. It was about, addiction making me a person that I didn't want to be. And so I think that one thing that treatment gave me was, that, oh my gosh, okay, so this is a safe place that I can talk about this. That's amazing. whereas I had never, ever had that before. So to answer Jade's question, I think that was probably, one of the biggest things that I took, and, that was in 1998. So.
Thank you. I'm sure we've got more questions out there somewhere. Craig, you got a good question?
I'm usually in the
It
habit
looks
of
like he's thinking.
asking students questions and seeing if they'll ever answer, but I don't know. Sonia has unmuted, so she might have a
Oh,
question.
okay.
I'll use that
Sonia?
as a dodge to think of one.
I have a question real quick.
Lily, yeah.
Yeah, my husband's in jail for a crime, obviously, and I'm just curious, do y'all see a lot of people that abuse drugs through medical diagnoses and then commit serious crimes like murder and stuff?
I mean, I used to see that frequently back whenever I was in the other counseling field, when I was working as an attorney counseling folks. So I mean, it's not uncommon at all. When I was in treatment, the odd thing for me was I went to treatment for alcohol. I got down there, everybody in treatment was heroin addicts, and almost all of them started with pills, and then they got cut off and they wound up going to heroin because it seemed to be the cheaper alternative. And a lot of them had all kinds of stuff stacked on top of them, legal problems. So I would say, that's probably, unfortunately, real common in my experience.
That's really sad. I was just curious how common it was, because it's practically what happened to my husband. He had epilepsy and he had a bunch of pills prescribed to him. And then he allegedly committed a crime, which he didn't do, but was sentenced for through a jury.
Well, and I think that while that is extremely common, more often than not, those folks are going to fall into that. Maybe not, maybe they don't make it to drug court. Maybe they do get incarcerated and don't get the help that they may need until they get out. So I personally don't have a whole lot of that on my caseload, but I can understand how, when those people get out, then maybe they get the help that they need afterwards, not before, unfortunately.
Yeah, because I've been watching the judge recently through the COVID thing, and they don't tend to favor drug court, really. Want to send them away, and it's sad to watch.
Yeah.
Indeed. There is a question in the chat from Sonia.
Yeah, I just read that. Yeah, so Sonia was mentioning the functioning addiction and how do we approach that when we don't see a conflict. One of the main things we use is motivational interviewing. And I mean, if somebody is happy with the way their life is and doesn't want to change, I mean, I'm not one to impose my ideas and my will for their life on them. Some people want to approach addiction from a harm reduction stance. They don't want to drink as much as they're drinking. And maybe they're, not everybody's an addict, or an alcoholic. There's a small percentage. There are people who have problematic behaviors with substances that aren't full-blown addiction. So we look at, can they reduce their intake, and how much dysfunction is it causing in your life? How much discord in your relationship? What are your consequences? And the problem with people who don't have a lot of consequences is there's not a lot of motivation to change. For whatever reason, it usually has to come from some form of emotional, physical, spiritual pain, despair, that loneliness Randy talked about. When I got into treatment, there was an old substance abuse counselor that said, "You look pretty scared and pretty lonely." And I said, "I'm both of those." He said, "You don't ever have to be alone again." And for whatever reason, I believed him. And I can honestly say, I haven't been alone since that day. I have friends like Jeff and Randy, and more friends than I've ever wanted my whole entire life. And most of them all are in recovery and I get to do some pretty cool things. I'm a guy that gets to come out to the university and teach a substance abuse class in a program that I almost got dismissed from for substance abuse. I mean, in what world does that happen?
Yeah.
I would say you've made it.
Well, I don't
Good
know.
job.
Today.
Well, let's just stay in today
Yeah.
on that.
There's a
Right.
big one day at a time thing we use there for a very particular reason, because people ask me if I'm going to stay sober for the rest of my life, and I have no absolute idea. I will never be living the rest of my life in any one moment. So all I'm going to live in is right here, right now, today. And for my family's sake, because of the fear that I cause through my addiction, sometimes my wife will ask me, "Are you doing okay?" And I used to get defensive about that, because why would you ask me that? I'm a wonderful guy in recovery. Well, I caused some trauma to her through my life and addiction. And my response now is, I can tell you're afraid because of some of the actions I took in the past. I want you to know you don't have anything to be afraid about today. And I'm going to stay sober till I go to bed tonight. And then we'll start again tomorrow and see how that day goes. So that's just kind of for me. And I've been taught to live that way. Just stay in a moment, because somebody can be a superstar one day and be running down state line batshit crazy the next. So you got to be real careful with the pedestal, because it's a long fall down. We have to stay right sized in recovery. There's this pendulum of thinking you're awesome, and then there's the other side of that is thinking you're unworthy and you don't deserve everything. What a life of recovery has taught me is to stay right sized, just a human among humans, just doing this thing one day at a time.
And I want to say something too, real quick, in response to that question. And I think this is one of the things that can make substance abuse treatment difficult, is that in any substance abuser, the addiction process is going to be different. And so, whereas, we could go downtown right now, we're going to find lots of people who are living down there by the railroad tracks in that tent city down there. And those are probably all alcoholics and drug addicts. But like this person that it's mentioned in here, they're still coaching their little league team, and they have a good marriage, and maybe they still have employment, but maybe they're drinking every night. And so one thing that I think that we look at is dysfunction. How is this alcohol or drug, like how is that influencing your behaviors and attitudes at home? Because now this conversation came up pretty recently with someone. They had all that stuff. They had the good job. They had the nice family. They, everything was going well. But they started to realize that when they were at home, they would be under the influence. And so they weren't fully present for their family. And once they realized that, they were like, oh my gosh, I must be an alcoholic and I need to stop. Well, that person can be an alcoholic just like the person who's drinking every day, who has nothing, and life's going nowhere. That those are both alcoholics. There are probably hundreds, if not thousands, of different types of alcoholics and addicts. And I think that can make the diagnosis and treatment, extremely difficult sometimes. So anyway, now there's another question over there.
Yeah, I'll briefly address Sonia's in regards to mental health issues and substance abuse. A lot of times we're fighting to figure that out. What came first, the chicken or the egg? Is the mental health issue a product of the addiction, or was it there previous? So a lot of times you do have to establish a period of sobriety, because someone on methamphetamine may appear to be very bipolar or schizophrenic. Are they truly that? We have to get them detoxed to get them well, and then see what's there to treat. But that dual diagnosis, it just adds another layer of complexity to treatment. But I think for most part, most alcoholics and addicts have got some underlying, if at bare minimum, depression and anxiety issues. And we self-medicate and we treat just inappropriately. I tell people all the time, drugs and alcohol are a solution, just not a great one. It's not medically appropriate for your issue. Alcohol is a depressant. So if you're using it to cure your depression, you're just going to compound the issue. And then you can get very dark place and get suicidal. And so we have to look at treating mental health issues with proper, appropriate treatment, people not taking their treatment into their own hands and try to cure their illness through addiction. And so we want to be very mindful, very compassionate Because if we're not, and we misdiagnose and mislabel and don't treat people adequately, because a big trigger personally for me, I'll self-disclose again, a big trigger for me is depression. And so I have to manage my depression appropriately with a doctor who fully understands my addiction and who is never going to prescribe me anything that's going to trigger my addiction, but not allow my depression to get out of hand where it triggers my addiction. So
Right.
it's a big balancing game. And I don't know if that answers the question.
I think it does. And
Counselors,
I'll tie into it too and say that, one thing that I think makes mental health problems and substance abuse go hand in hand is the person with the mental health problems will learn to rely on the substance, and they'll know, for example, if I use cocaine, I know exactly what cocaine is about to do to me. It's going to speed me up tremendously. It's going to make me feel like this. That's why we call them stimulants, right? We know what this drug is going to do. If I drink, I know what that's going to do. If I snort Xanax, I know what that's going to do. That's why we call those depressants, right? We have different drug categories. And so I know that if I'm struggling, if I'm having depression, or, someone mentioned PTSD right here, if I'm having some sort of traumatic experience right now, some flashback, and I know that if I get drunk, that might take that away, I'm going to do it. And I think that we develop that sort of like dependent relationship where if I'm struggling, I know I can get high and it's going to go away. And so I think that to combat that, we have to be able to provide that person with enough hope that, look, it's going to suck. There's nothing that can make it not suck, but I'm here with you. I'm going to help you walk through this process, and I'll be here for you every step of the way. And so we provide them that support, and we provide them that faith that we're not going to let them be alone through this. I don't know. That was kind of what I was thinking.
Yeah. Well, I was sitting here thinking about, Billy talking about getting help even now if he feels like he needs some help. I mean, counselors go to counselors too. They
Yep.
get therapy too.
All the time.
All the
Yeah.
time.
Mhm.
And, we see the power of it, and we know that it helps people. But I'm thinking that, there's still a stigma about admitting that you have a mental health issue. You can say you have a heart issue, you can say you're diabetic, but if you say a mental health issue, people are scared to do that. And there's a
Definitely.
stigma about it even now, even though it's a little more common to talk about getting counseling. I think especially in the faith-based, in religion, you got God, just lean on God and he's going to take care of it. Well, you also need people to help you. And that's, you can't just pray and hope it'll go away.
Yeah, I can totally speak to that in a very understanding, compassionate way. I grew up in church. I'm still a person of faith. But when I was a young boy dealing with panic attacks and diagnosable clinical anxiety, I was told to pray about it. And that's very dismissive of a teen's pain. When if I was suffering from if I needed eyeglasses, they wouldn't say, well, just pray for better eyesight. They would take me to the optometrist and give me a pair of glasses. But there was a stigma surrounded around there was something spiritually wrong with me because I was dealing with a clinical diagnosis. And, I think there's more awareness today. There's more understanding, not enough. In some of our circles, we're saying things in religious communities like Celebrate Recovery, which has just incorporated a mental health side, because the founder of its son committed suicide. And so usually through people's own pain and experience, when it hits home in their real life, they begin to start to address the issues. But I have seen that kind of the idea with mental illness is just you need to pray a little harder and make it go away. And that's a very dangerous comment to make to someone who is really dealing with a severe disorder, because what it means is you're not working hard enough to solve your own problem. And if you just did this thing better and there wasn't something fundamentally morally wrong with you, maybe you would be worthy of getting better. And that's a very shameful feeling for people. So I hope we wake up to the need, and it's happening in small bits. We got a ways to go.
Yeah, we do.
All right, I was going to take the opportunity for us to thank our panelists. We don't have to end, but I was just going to end. But, you know, I just want to make sure that we get the opportunity to thank Billy, Jeff, and Randy, you know, for presenting, and Dr. Harless for moderating. So you can applaud where you are. You can put up little emoji applause. I mean, I don't know, thumbs up or something. So I think it was great. Thank you very much, folks. And but we can keep talking certainly if we want. But anyhow.
Yeah.